Hello, good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining this informational webinar on the theme of committing to nurture the Earth's ecosystem, a faith call to action in the lead up to the United Nations Biodiversity Summit, which is taking place on September 30th. Thanks to our organizers for the webinar today, the WWF, the World Evangelical Alliance, the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, the Baha'i International Community, the Parliament of World Religions, and Bhumi Global. My name is Gopal Patel. I serve as the director of Bhumi Global, an international Hindu initiative that works on climate change and biodiversity. I'm very happy to be hosting the webinar today. We have a lineup of excellent speakers from across different traditions to talk about the current biodiversity crisis that we're in, and specifically to talk about the upcoming UN Summit on Biodiversity and the work that faith groups are doing in the lead up to that, with a specific focus on the faith call to action that many of you may have already received. We're going to have, as I mentioned, 3 different presentations. And then at the end, we are going to leave time for question and answer and discussion. And so for that question and answer period, I really want us to focus on 2 main themes or questions. The first one is how our faiths and spirit traditions have inspired us to safeguard biodiversity. And also, what resources do we feel we need to integrate biodiversity into our current work and programming? This work with biodiversity and the partnership with WWF came about earlier this year, where we organized webinars in spring and summer, where we looked at the role that faith communities can play in terms of integrating biodiversity into their work. And we'll be hearing more from Chantal Elkin, who's the head of the Beliefs and Values program at WWF. But with them and the other organizations I just mentioned, we've been working closely to see how we can mobilize more faith groups in the UN system and broadly and outside of that to ensure that faiths are more engaged and active on biodiversity concerns. And so I'm very happy and excited to invite our first speaker, Ms. Deborah Boudreau, the Executive Vice President of the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, to share some words of inspiration and the actual work that her organization is doing in this regard. Deborah, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It's so grateful can be here today. It's unbelievable moment I'm currently in Southern California. Buddhism call to action to support the United Nations Biodiversity Summit. It's a right timing. Next slide, please. As you can see, the Mother Earth in fire. And it is in fire, especially in Southern California right now. It's heavy, heavy damage and hitting a lot of populated residential area. So Earth in fire, but we're going to face Earth in the nature, how we're going to collaborate in working together. Tzu Chi is a faith-based organization, Buddhist in action. Dharma Master Zheng Yan teaches us to embody our desire to protect the planet with our own 2 clapping hands. Next slide, please. So these 2 clapping hands is our concept for environmental protection movement. On the slide, you will see this logo. That's our 30 years environmental movement logo. Through the protection movement, Tzu Chi promote vegetarianism and ethical framework of consumption and production. We teach our volunteers the interconnected nature of what we consume, the natural resources we extract. So Tzu Chi share this kind of concept to request every volunteers to reconsider our live a lifestyle can coexistence with the natural world, utilizing the international platforms like UNCCC, COP, to raise the consciousness around the role of our consumption patterns integrate in the daily destroying precious ecosystems. That kind of mindful is very important. Also, faith-based teaching around the concept of enough is enough. Next slide, please. Tzu Chi push the concept by telling everybody we need to be responsible. You see the slide, save the lives, eat less meat. This slide is according to FAO 2018. We use the number to remind all the Tzu Chi volunteers, the Buddhist. We already a vegetarian volunteer group. However, a lot of time we do not have the number, the scientific background to back up. So since 2-3 years ago, our founder, Master Zheng Yan, just asked everybody, think about every second, do you know 2,443 animals are killed? This is not including marine creatures. Every day, over 210 million innocent creatures are slaughtered. Every year, over 77 billion animals lose their lives. See, this kind of number is not a number. It's a very important message to remind every one of us. Next slide, please. So through the ethical eating and ethical consumption and production concept, we remind everybody lifestyle coexists with nature world. So the enough movement is trying to remind everybody from your food on the table, from so-called materialism you have in your closet, or even our new technology, iPhone, we need to really consider our inner part and external part, your desire and your need. You have to balance that. So from that, we also remind everybody, plastic and human pollution. So this is very important when we talk about climate change, climate justice. The plastic and human pollution deep throat on ocean biodiversity, disrupting marine life and influencing fragile ecosystem. Some number to share with you. American buy 29 billion water bottles a year. And for every 6 bottles people buy, only 1 is recycled. It takes at least up to 1,000 years for every single bottle to decompose, leaking pollution into our soil and water along the way. That's a very scary number. And also, US landfill are overflowing with 2 million tons of discarded water bottle. This kind of number, if you never think about it, it's really scary. And plastic constitutes 90% of all the trash floating on the ocean surface. Approximately 46,000 pieces of plastic per square mile. So the number, the disaster, those kind of memory, it's so easy for us to floating around and think about it. And how from our daily life, your food, your transportation, your clothing, your housing, everything we can think about to protecting the nature world. So Tzu Chi, we encourage our volunteer 30 years ago already focus on these directions. Next slide, please. From this one, we restoring biodiversity. We have beach and river cleanup movement. The most successful cases, you can Google search Tzu Chi Angka River in Indonesia. Started in 2002. The hurricane hit the island and everything is in disaster. But we mobilized the volunteer to engage the youth to ask them, empower them to turn the disaster into a building with the resilience and restore the community, clean the river, biodiversity, all the area we have been encouraged to them. Beach and river cleanup movement, almost all the NGO, INGO, everybody engaged. And Tzu Chi looked into that kind of model of practice very seriously and turn the resilience into a sustainable housing project and demonstrate daily practice of their lifestyle pattern. The other one is Jingsi abode. You can see on the pictures. It's very peaceful. Every day, our masters living in a Jingsi abode coexist with the nature. And we have an education station to tell everybody when you walk into the abode, no air condition, very simple, frugal life, and everyone self-sufficient. We have very strong philosophy. Day without work, day without food. So you have to work and demonstrate you coexist with the Mother Earth and you respect the Mother Nature and you appreciate the biodiversity around you. So Buddhism, our faith, inspire us to put principle into action, Buddhas in action. The Bodhisattva is one who serves all the sentient beings. This includes our entire nature world. One candle lights infinite, being the candle that inspires others to transform. So from local to global, Tzu Chi empowering each one of our volunteers to understand how their actions are interconnected with the global systems they live in, recognizing the deep value of their action as a global citizens. The most important is the mindfulness. Mindfulness on impact of personal behavior on one's environment and the consciousness of harmful action and habits. That's we call personal habit. It's a karma. So philosophy of reductions and simple lifestyle, minimizing one's ecological footprint. It is not just about the action itself, but the compassion for all sentient beings that these actions inspire their consciousness. Remember, action is temporary. Behavior change is the root cause. So how Buddhism can continue support biodiversity besides chanting, besides sutra study, the most important is action. Tzu Chi has been in supporting biodiversity. This is our 30 years. It will be ongoing until our Mother Earth is in a healthy and prosperity and safety for all the generation incomes. Thank you very much. This is my presentation. Over, back to you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, to set the scene there and to showcase the wonderful work that the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation is doing globally. I'd now like to ask Chantal Elkin, the director of the Beliefs and Values program at WWF, to speak a little bit about the work that WWF is doing in this space and more to the current moment we're in the biodiversity crisis. And I believe WWF also released a new report today, State of the Planet 2020. So Chantal, over to you.
Thank you, Gopal, and thank you, Deborah. Yeah, so I'm Chantal. I head a new program at WWF on beliefs and values. And prior to that, I worked with the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, ARC. So I spent sort of a good 10 years trying to bring together the faith and conservation worlds in partnership to support, heal, and protect nature. And I wanted to just take a few minutes today to, as Gopal said, to underscore what a critical moment we're in terms of nature protection right now and how critical faith voices are at this moment in time. So I know that there's been a lot of faith action and interest and awareness about climate change, but I think perhaps faith groups have been less involved in focusing on biodiversity loss. And what I will now refer to as nature, just an all-encompassing term of, to mean wild places and wildlife. Sorry, a little quieter. And just to, there's so many facts and figures to draw on, but really to highlight the fact that we're in the 6th mass extinction. And this is the first one that is being driven by humankind. And we're seeing an almost 70% decrease in the populations of most animals since 1970. So really the earth is in crisis. And I think most of us have been feeling that with this recent pandemic. And it's a scary figure to think that 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are actually passed from animals to humans. And that's being accelerated by the loss of animal habitats and the overhunting of animals and overconsumption of animals, and we're just coming into contact with wildlife in ways that we really shouldn't be. There are actually loads of reports, and Gopal mentioned the Living Planet report, but I think this slide is particularly quite significant, because it demonstrates that there really is an intimate connection between our human health, our society's health, our economic health, and the health of biodiversity. So according to this report, 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals will not be met if we don't stop the loss of nature. It's pretty serious stuff. It refers to poverty and clean water access and economic growth and all kinds of other indicators of societal health. So yes, today WWF launched its Living Planet report, and it's a pretty depressing scientific study of what's happening in our world and the state of our planet. And it really is unequivocal now that the science really points to the fact that we are destroying the planet at an unprecedented rate in history. So it's pretty serious. However, the report also tells us that we still have a great opportunity right now to halt and reverse the loss of nature, but we have to take urgent and unprecedented action. So we can do this over the next 10 years. If we protect more natural spaces, we curb the unsustainable exploitation of species, and we reform key economic sectors responsible for nature loss, particularly our food systems. So now that we're armed with all the awareness about the threats and the issues, and also how we can, find solutions to all of these terrible issues that are confronting us, now is the time to take action, as Deborah said. It's all about action, and we're in this fantastic moment, which has been termed the super year for nature. And it's just kicking off this month, which is why we're all here today. We're talking about the call to action focused on the first ever Biodiversity Summit at the UNGA later this month. So we have an opportunity there when 80 heads of state gather to really influence them and across these sort of major 5 events across the super year for nature, to call on policymakers and businesses to step up their action to conserve nature and make sure that nature-based solutions are a key part of all these international agreements and frameworks that are being negotiated this year. So as I said, the first one is the UN Biodiversity Summit coming up the end of September. Then in January is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature World Conservation Congress And then that's followed by the UNEA in Nairobi in February. And a very important milestone is the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP, which is going to be in 2021 as well. And the Convention on Biological Diversity is basically, it's the key document on biodiversity. So this next meeting will outline the major milestones and targets for the next decade for biodiversity. So that's really an important meeting. And then the last one is the climate change talks in Glasgow, the Climate Change Summit. So we really have an opportunity now to join forces. WWF has developed this this program called the New Deal for Nature and People to develop this civil society organization network of businesses, youth, development groups, conservation groups, and now, thanks to you, faith groups, to call on policymakers and businesses, as I said, along this year's timeline for serious action to protect nature. So now is the time to act. I'm so excited that you're all here and willing to look at this call to action that has been drafted. And I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, happy to answer those later. Thanks a lot, Gopal, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Chantal, for really laying it out on the table in terms of what's at stake, but also the opportunity, not just at this Biodiversity Summit, but that this Biodiversity Summit kicks off a calendar of activities and events where faith groups can play a really strong role in shifting the discourse and direction of action on nature. So thanks for that. And also thank you for WWF for being such a wonderful support and partner in this work with the faith community. We'd now like to ask Daniel Perel from the Baha'i International Community. Dan is a UN rep for the Baha'i International Community and was part of the drafting team for the faith call to action. I'd like to ask Dan to take the floor and share a little bit of the process and the call to action itself. I can unmute him.
Great, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to see you all here. And thank you to, of course, Chantal, Gopal, and Deborah for those helpful remarks. Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are. Yes, as Gopal said, I'm Daniel Perel. I represent the Baha'i community. And as many of you probably know, I often like to use analogies to help me think about these large and complicated questions. And what I keep thinking about in today's context is that the planet is suffering from an illness, and we must be seeking appropriate remedies, sort of like an ill patient seeks a doctor. So in order to do this, we first need to have an understanding of what health looks like. What is the definition of a healthy patient? And in this case, of a healthy planet. And for Baha'is, and I think many on this call, we turn to our sacred writings to find guidance on these matters. And for those who may not be as familiar, I'll just start with sharing a few quotes from the Baha'i writings. So the first is, it sort of says that the natural world is really a reflection of the beauty and perfection of God. And Baha'u'llah says, nature in its essence is the embodiment of my name, the maker, the creator. Its manifestations are diversified by varying causes. And in this diversity, there are signs for men of discernment. Nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. So human beings additionally flourish and advance in social and natural environments, of course. And only to the degree that these relationships with others and the natural world are consciously improved can progress continue. So another quote from Shoghi Effendi says, we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us, and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world, his inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. Now, finally, the last sort of thought I'll share on this matter is that noble ideals are meaningful only to the degree that effort is made to put them into practice in our individual and collective lives, as we've heard from preceding speakers. So every choice a Baha'i makes leaves a trace, and the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims. And we are enjoined to practice stewardship of the earth as an expression of world citizenship. As trustees of the planet, vast resources, and biological diversity, humanity must protect the heritage of future generations. And this calls for full consideration of the potential environmental consequences of all human endeavors. It compels humanity to temper its actions with moderation and humility, affirming that nature should not be exploited for self-interest. So then what does this actually look like? If we return to the doctor analogy, if we have an understanding of what health is for the planet and humanity, the co-benefits for each are quite clear. And so then we have to diagnose the harmful practices and determine the remedies. And this takes place at a number of levels. And it's not to prioritize one over the other, but we have the local, the national, the regional, the global, and each of these has its own role. And today I'll focus on only two of these levels. First is a little bit about what the Baha'i community is doing locally, and then why we're engaging in this process in particular at the international level. And in that latter half, I'll talk a little bit about the faith call to action. So at the local level, Baha'is around the world are trying to learn about how these noble ideals can be expressed in committed and sustained action. And this is similar to what many of the faith communities on the call are doing. They're setting in motion processes of capacity building that really enable people of all backgrounds to participate in the transformation of society and to make conscious decisions about, for example, patterns of production and consumption. And these communities are coming to recognize that a sustainable pattern of life is really dependent on the extent to which all of humanity is willing to adopt this approach. So one example comes from Agua Azul in Colombia, and this is actually about the Baha'i houses of worship. And these are open to all. They seek to embody the principle that worship of God is intimately related to and inseparable from service to humanity. And as they begin to emerge at the local level, these houses of worship call on local communities to assess their own conditions and realities and determine what meaningful steps of progress might look like for them. So for the residents of Agua Azul, this movement took the form of a reforestation project on the grounds of the house of worship, where there are conversations about the types of trees and flowers that were indigenous to the community and that they would like to surround the house of worship. This led to the idea of the bosque nativo, or native forest, which helped to reintroduce this native vegetation to the area, which had been decimated by the proliferation of sugarcane plantations across the land over many decades. And then in neighboring villages, individuals have begun to donate seeds and plants, some of which were thought to be near extinction, that can be grown on the land around the temple site and in a greenhouse that has been built for this project. So this effort has not only these physical benefits, but it's actually deepening the connections among the residents with the history of their land and with each other. And one resident said that the truth is that Norte del Cauca was once an immense forest, but all of that has been destroyed. Now none of it exists. One thing I want with this project is that new generations should know what once existed. This native forest that we are going to grow should be a school, should be a place of learning. So from one side of the world to the other, in Winilunga, Zambia, there are a group of Baha'i youth who participated in, a group of youth participated in a Baha'i-inspired program aimed at building their capacity to become protagonists in their development. And so they were also assessing the needs of their community. And one thing that they noticed was that certain ecosystems in their local area were suffering, they were stressed, and they made efforts to restore them. So now this is again a youth group. And so in one area, many of the ponds had lost their fish stocks, and the group started to revitalize the ponds by raising consciousness in the community about how its members could fish in a way that would not deplete these stocks. And the efforts have helped to stimulate a range of other activities related to the protection of biodiversity. They've engaged the community in tree planting activities in order to further rehabilitate the natural environment. And these various conversations and actions which arise from these endeavors have then contributed to improving aspects of the local culture as diverse members of the community are now working shoulder to shoulder. So the efforts of this group have shown how an appreciation for our natural heritage can lead to a concerted action to protect it and in turn strengthen the patterns of community life. So finally, to look at the international dimension of this remedy, there is near universal consensus of the illness, and yet the remedy necessary has been presented as quite painful, like chemotherapy for cancer. But we're seeing that by being clever and solutions-oriented, the remedy to the problem is actually not painful, and it assists humanity and nature to develop better habits. I mean, humanity develops better habits, nature already has them. It is more like changing one's diet than receiving chemotherapy. Yes, we may have to sacrifice some of the perceived short-term pleasures that we've grown accustomed to, but it's all in service of this greater long-term benefit. So in this sense, the various calls to action that have been produced through the wisdom and support of WWF are examples of different communities saying we agree that we have to change our diet, and indeed we understand that it is to the long-term benefit of all. So to turn to the process of drafting this statement, it was entirely voluntary. We were represented by individuals from the Hindu tradition, Buddhist, Baha'i, Christian, as well as a large multi-faith organization in the Parliament of the World's Religions. We went through a number of drafts in consultation with each other, with our colleagues, and with others. And as a result, much of what you see there is actually a product of an iterative process that sought to achieve both consensus and aspiration. So it was really nice. I think we really learned a lot in the process together, and hopefully the product is suitable for many of you to sign on to and to help advance in your own communities. So we already have 35 different faith-based organizations that have signed on to the statement. It's quite an accomplishment, but we are confident that many more will be joining us. Now, just to sort of walk through a little bit, thank you, Gopal, for putting a link to the text. Just to walk through a little bit this call to action, there are a number of points that I think are particularly compelling. So firstly, we ground the contribution in an expression of that which compels us to act. It's indeed for the good of humanity and the planet, of course, but it's also out of a sense of the sacred and the divine. And this is really important to vast swaths of the global population. We then offer an expression of humility. And I think this is really important, as many of the forces today confuse humility and a posture of learning with weakness, when in fact we know that they are the first step towards taking these necessary changes. We then articulate a vision for the type of world we wish to help bring about, and in that sense we offer a few commitments. The creation of long-term plans, which you'll hear more about after this intervention, how we plan to work together through cooperation, collective action, in a humble spirit of learning, and then acknowledging that it's actually in our diversity that we will find our greatest assets. We will turn to those who are often at the front lines of these issues for their experience and their learning. And then there's this aspect of self-assessment, which is also kind of a missing link in many of these processes. We're committing to revisiting what we have achieved periodically. And then we align ourselves with other calls to action and express our support for the UN. So importantly, this call to action, and all of them, in fact, serve as opportunities to make the request of our governments that they too take the necessary steps to ameliorate the Earth's suffering. One specific call we make is to ensure that the current frameworks we use are guided by the needs of nature. For too long, just as an example, the pursuit of growth has gone unbounded by planetary limits, and this and other habits must be curtailed. So in sum, the natural world is facing a crisis that demands our urgent attention, and this has to come on a number of fronts: local actions, regional, national, and global. And national governments have to take decisions and implement nature-positive policies. And the global community has to agree on a shared values and a shared vision for the world we want to see, and then commit before all the world to genuinely work towards that end, and then to actually do it. And in this sense, humanity at this moment does have great potential to advance, and to take another quote from the Baha'i writings, a change of heart, a reframing of all our conceptions, and a new orientation of our activities. The inward life of man, as well as his outward environment, have to be reshaped if human salvation is to be secured. So I hope you all will join us. And thank you, of course, to my co-drafters and to Gopal and Chantal for organizing this. And we are happy, of course, to answer any questions and to hear from you. So back to you, Gopal.
Great, thanks so much, Dan, for sharing that process. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes just to maybe, Steve, we can take down the screen share. I just wanted to just share a little bit, highlight one thing that Dan mentioned around one of the commitments in the call to action. You'll see that the first commitment that we commit to is to developing and implementing long-term values-based plans. And so that's in there for a very specific reason. We feel that the shift that needs to take place is not a short-term or a temporary fix, but there needs to be a long-term shift, and therefore a long-term plan needs to be there. And so we're working with someone called Martin Palmer, who many of you may know. Martin Palmer was the Secretary General for the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, and now is running a new nonprofit called Faith Invest. And Martin is working with a number of other organizations with faith groups for them to develop their own long-term plans. And so what we'll be doing is every faith group that signs this particular call to action will be receiving an invitation from Martin Palmer to be part of his long-term plan initiative, which is very detailed, which asks faith groups to develop long-term plans over a 10-year time frame, looking at, I believe, 7 or 8 different thematic areas. And those long-term plans will be developed over the next 6 to 8 months and will be launched next spring. And there'll be support by way of expertise and guidance in the development of those plans. And more importantly, advice and support how to implement those plans when those plans have been finalized. And so again, everyone who signs this call to action is committing to a long-term plan, and we do have a mechanism in place where we can help really support and make those long-term plans as much a reality as possible. So I just want to flag that. And this is a program that Martin Palmer has been running previously. He previously did it in 2009, 2010, when about, I think, 60 long-term plans were launched. And this time around, I think we're looking at launching between 100 to 200 faith long-term plans for protecting the planet. So it's a really large civil society movement led by the faith groups. And so Martin Palmer will be in touch on that. Just a little bit before we get into the discussion around just how this call to action is going to be shared at the Summit on Biodiversity, because obviously that's something that's of interest to us. So we've been working with WWF to see what are the opportunities we can highlight this faith call to action alongside the other calls to action which are coming out. Already what's been happening behind the scenes is that WWF, in their communication with various heads of states and member states, have been including the faith call to action and have been including the current signatories to the faith call to action. So that's already going out to different member states so they know which are the faith groups which have already signed on. So that's already great progress. On the 18th of September, WWF will be issuing a press release which will make reference to our faith call to action, and we'll be having 2 quotes in that press release from 2 of the signatories. The week of the 20th, UNDP are hosting a Nature for Life high-level leaders dialogue and hub. And so Martin Palmer is one of the speakers at one of those events. And in his remarks, he'll be also referencing and highlighting this faith call to action. And then finally, on the week of the 20th, we'll also be doing another more high-level webinar talking about this call to action and the progress that we can make, over the next year with all the other key moments coming up. So there are a number of key ways that we're trying to lift up this faith call to action. And as Dan said, we have about 35 or 40 groups already signed on, and it's only been out for a week. So we really hope that number can increase. The final deadline in order to be included in any kind of communication is the 18th. But obviously beyond that date, if folks still want to sign on, they're more than welcome to. But in terms of for the summit itself, the 18th is the hard deadline that we're looking at. So that's what we have to share. I'd love to open the floor now for any questions or comments and discussion. And Steve, maybe we can bring up the 2 questions if you still have them. We're really wanting to focus our conversation around these 2 questions. The first is, as we've heard a lot today on the call, how has your faith tradition inspired us in our work on safeguarding biodiversity? And crucially, what resources do we feel we need to further integrate biodiversity into our campaigning and our programs? So I'll open the floor now. Everyone is on mute, so I'm going to allow participants to unmute themselves, and so we can have a bit of a conversation. And maybe, I don't know if we should leave this slide up or maybe we take it down. Maybe we take it down just so we can see everyone's beautiful faces. And we'll stop the recording here so we can have more of an open conversation.